Welcome to Offwatch, a podcast by the Ocean Race. My guest this week was Damian Foxall, a 5-time competitor in the race and a winner with Groupama in 2011-12, and now a passionate advocate for ocean health. If you enjoy this interview, leave us a like, subscribe for more. We've plenty more lined up, but don't forget to let us know in the comments below who you want us to talk to next. Enjoy. Damian Foxall is one of a few Irish sailors in the races past, but somebody that's made a big impact, having competed in 5 editions and winning the race with Groupama in 2011-12. Outside of the race, he's also a big name in sailing, having made very substantial efforts in sailing records, not least the circumnavigation of the globe with Steve Fawcett. But perhaps it's not the performance and the competition as much as the adventure that drives him. Damian, thank you very much for talking to me today. The reason I say that is there was an interesting quote of yours that I found where you expressed something that I think many people have said before, where a lot of young people who might come into our sport might get turned off by that relentless pursuit of performance and competition above all else. What is it for yourself that gets you back out there? I mean, that sort of thing for some people might be a big driver. It might be something that puts them back on the shore. For you, something's got to be getting you back out on the water every day.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I'm just trying to remember actually when, in what context that that comment was made, but I think it was probably maybe a comment around the reason for sailing and the sailing community and the support for sailing communities, and whether, what are the roles of sailing organizations in promoting and sustaining the sport. And I think these are all big questions that we need to consider in a broader context now as well. Performance and competition is something that we're all involved with, I guess, and I've been involved with for a long time. But it didn't start there. I grew up in Southwest Ireland. We grew up adventure sailing. And I reconnected with that again recently because we just came out of Antarctica this winter, and seeing the continent for the first time, despite having seen ice before, was a big eye-opener. And it rejuvenated me, I guess, in many ways, and allowed me to reconnect with some of the primary reasons that we go out in the water in the first place. And it had nothing to do with competition.
I want to hear more about Antarctica, but before I do, I want to pick up on something you said. You grew up on a farm, and I think I've got this right. Correct me if I'm wrong here, but your introduction to sailing differs from most people, certainly most people who go on to do the ocean race. I mean, you weren't somebody that was in a squad with a coach driving hard. You had quite a kind of, natural introduction to being on the water and mucking about in boats.
Yeah, no, totally. I guess the seed was planted because in the attic of the house at home, there were cardboard boxes of old pewter trophies that my granddad would have won on in the Wirral at the West Kirby Sailing Club. So I think, and Mum would have sailed with him. So I guess the apple didn't drop far from the tree. But growing up in Southwest Ireland, there was definitely no yacht clubs or sailing programs. We sailed through the winter, built our own surfboards, had a small dinghy. And in the context of kind of just general life, I think our freezer was full of farm produce and fish produce. And we just took it for granted that, the land supported us. And I was mentioning that to someone else earlier on today, actually, that, the first time that when I've started sailing internationally and sailing into places like Miami or Rio, it really struck me. It was like the first time I saw really a metropolis on the edge of the water. And, when you arrive in a country from the water, you have a very different perspective than when you arrive by plane. And, sort of looking at those cities on the edge of the water and just going, how does that work? What supports that city? Like, where does all the food come from? And it was really an eye-opener. And I think at the time I just thought about it in the context of the immediate geographic situation of that city on the edge of the water. But of course, now we recognize that resources are much more finite than just that. So anyway, that's a separate linked topic that I'm sure we'll get to. But sailing's been something that's being on and around the water is something that's been inherent to the way I grew up. I've been very, very lucky to have made a career on and around the water, and to have evolved that career, I guess, over the last decade into kind of bringing back a connection to the natural world and sustainability. So we're very lucky to be involved on the water and in sailing, and I think it's a privilege that brings a lot of opportunities and responsibilities as well.
Let's talk about that luck, because that's the piece of the puzzle that I don't yet understand. Is you are young kid, teenager, early 20s, and you're sailing in a very kind of free way. Your name then crops up in quite a big way, a big splash in the Figaro circuit in France. Now, a couple of weeks ago, I spoke to Johan Richomme, and he talked about the Figaro. So I've had my crash course in what a brutal piece of sailing that is. But I think the key thing for me, with your experience, is you seem to get in through the front door. You're there in the French, the Brittany training base. You are learning from the experts. How did we get from being a plucky Irish lad on a farm to being right in the heart of the best, offshore sailing school that there is?
Yeah, and I think at the time I knew why I wanted to be there, but probably didn't realize the full extent of the opportunity. But there's quite a few miles and years between those two timelines that you set for me. So I left school early. I spent almost 7 years working in the Caribbean yachting industry. During that time, I started doing a lot of racing on the American circuit. Was involved with the Irish Admirals Cup team. In the Caribbean, I saw the Route de Rhum arriving, saw Florence Artaud arrive on our Groupe Pierre Premier. Beautiful trimaran, silver, turquoise, and, along with all the other trimarans arriving at the end of that race. And, I sort of realized that there's a whole other world out there around sailing. I think it was just, for most of us of this era, I guess, we're in the right place at the right time as the sport became a professional sport, attracted commercial sponsors, and has gone on to be, in our own way, a professional sport. So I was lucky. I worked with amazing people, Gordon McGuire, Paul Stanbridge, and Paul specifically said, given your skill set and, what you want to do, I think you should go and get involved in the Figaro, and just stop talking to me about it, mate. Just go and do it. And the way Paul would. And so that was it. I'd previously sailed with Sydney Gavinier. He introduced me to Michel Desjoyaux. Amazing introduction to the Valley des Fous, the sailing valley in Brittany. And I think at the time I was probably one of the very few outsiders, so to speak, or non-French sailors to get involved in that discipline at that stage.
How did you find a comparatively small boat like the Figaro 3 with foils? How was that performing on the water when you got it going?
I guess it's an evolution of the sport that we see across many disciplines, and there are many classes where foils bring a new added value and aspect of the sport which is needed. It's probably partially the reason why we see, a lot of kids even back windsurfing, but certainly kiteboarding or surfing are looking for adrenaline, speed-driven sports. And so, things like the 49er, which are fairly inaccessible for early sailors, but they certainly need something nice to aspire to. They're rather much in other classes which are much more accessible, performance classes which are much more accessible for the young sailor. And many of them now include foils or a foil package. And so there's a place for that. I'm not sure that there's a place for foiling in every single class.
Yeah.
And sure, the foils bring something nice to the Figaro. It makes it more it makes it a more difficult discipline, significantly more difficult, sorry. And I wonder whether ultimately it's just created now a class which is a bit higher than it should be in terms of skill, in terms of skill requirements for an entry-level class. It's still serving its role in feeding the best sailors from a one design class into things like the Ocean Race and the Vendée Globe. But to get into the class, it's significantly more expensive. There's a significant difference in terms of the how you performance of the best sailor against someone who's not quite up to speed. I wonder if it really is providing the best platform, honestly. But we're all falling now, so let's get on with it.
Better get used to it. Well, you mentioned the ocean race, so let's turn to that. Let's talk Team Tycho, and you come into the race when the UK, Ireland were sort of featuring quite strongly in the race, sort of geographically, starting from Southampton. I remember going down to Ocean Village in Southampton and seeing Team Tycho, Assa Abloy, all those boats, all the 60s lined up there. What got you onto those boats? Obviously, you'd made a bit of a name for yourself in the Figaro. Was that the missing piece of the puzzle? Was it plain sailing from there?
I think that certainly, yes, I think, short answer. Yes, it was. I'd sailed previously with Paul Stanbridge, with Steve Hales. Steve helped me significantly with the weather routing preparation for the Figaro. We were involved with a couple of Irish campaigns on the Mum 36 circuit, and in regattas in Hawaii and big boat series, etc. So I was on the Grand Prix circuit as well as doing my Figaro racing and starting to get involved in some round the world events. And it was I just was in the right place at the right time, and was invited on to Tycho as as bowman mastman, and joined a great group of guys, and it was it was all I expected and more. And I think at that stage, I'm not sure if there were any ice skates, so we saw a lot of Antarctica. We saw a lot of floating Antarctica. I think we got further south than 60 south, somewhere in the middle of the Pacific. And it was everything that I expected the Whitbread, then the Volvo Ocean Race to be, everything and more. And we've short memories, as we all say, and that was it. We went on from there. I think Tycho was a great project in terms of the way it was managed. It was a very professional project. And I was lucky to kind of use that as a launching board for moving on to future campaigns. What became very evident was that even with the best team or the best managed project, to win something like the Ocean Race, it requires you to get your block of bricks out and make everyone perfectly placed. But even then, there's no guarantee that it's going to give you a result. It took a while before I finally managed to get a win in the Ocean Race. The result of, I think, 4 or 5 ocean races. And ultimately, when you think of it, at the time, they were coming around every 3 or 4 years. So nearly 20 years of work to get there. But it's been ultimately, I guess, a significant part of my sailing life.
Did you ever have a point? Sorry, my mind is completely transfixed with what you were saying about the ice skates. Of course, I knew that there weren't ice skates, and then I knew that there was ice skates. I didn't think that there was, I just didn't place when it was that you go from, well, we're dodging this iceberg, to we're going to stay a long way away from it. With an experience like that, or certainly anybody's first ocean race experience, was there a point when you thought, this isn't for me, I'm stepping back?
No, I think as a young person, you're sort of going, okay, well, this seems to be the way it's done. At least it is, at least that seems the way it's done in the other movies we've been watching, videos we've been watching of Steinlager and all of the others. So this is it, we're into it. It's like, but God, I'm happy someone else is in charge, sort of thing, and then of course obviously, experience comes along and you kind of move up in terms of responsibility. And by that stage, we'd integrated ice skates, but I've been involved with events where the Jules Verne, for instance, or around the world events like the Barcelona, where even if there were ice skates, you were diving south very quickly to take the shortest, fastest route. And yeah, when you're racing, ice is not a good thing. It's a scary thing. It was amazing this winter to have spent 4 months down in Antarctica, literally parked in ice or alongside it, and listening to glaciers falling off the continent. It's given me a new respect, but maybe I would almost say like a dangerous respect for it. I'm a lot more familiar with ice now than I was 30 years ago.
What is that like when you do, you've only ever seen these things as sort of looming potential, and let's say it, death traps, and you can get up close to them, you can hear them. What is that moment like? I've got nothing that I can compare it with or even imagine it.
Yeah, I think the closest, my first contact with real ice, I think, apart from my time here in Canada, is when we broke the rig with Dongfeng 2 races ago. And we ended up piloting the boat through the Beagle Channel in the middle of the night and passing, there's no moon at that stage. And Pascal said, he was down below navigating, said, do you mind coming down and having a look at the chart? And there was sort of a series of zigzags on the chart, which neither of us had seen before, but they were obviously very clearly at the exit, the frontier basically of every valley where the mountain met the sea. And we're like, I don't know what that is. And then just as whoever was driving on deck, it was like at that stage, everyone was asleep and one guy on deck. He said, maybe it was Kevin. He said, guys, you got to come up and check this out. And the moon had just come up over the mountain and lit up this new valley face that we were passing, and it was glacier. So a zigzag icon on a chart is glacier face. So we saw that as we
write that down,
as we went through the Beagle Channel, and then spent the next few days doing a jury rig mass to get the boat back in the race. But then moving on to this last winter and 4 months in Antarctica, obviously when you're cruising, you've got the time to, hopefully you're in the right boat. We're in an aluminum boat, so designed for the purpose, and you go at the right speed, but still the same challenges. When there's cold, when the water's cold and the air isn't, it gets foggy. Visibility can come down quite quickly. Around the Antarctic continent, it creates its own weather, katabatic winds and quick weather changes, so you have to be really careful. Anchorages are few and far between, and even when you find an anchorage, ice is moving in and out of it all the time. So there's a real kind of challenge to finding the right safe place to be. But it's a whole skill set that you take basically take the skills that we've learned from other aspects of sailing, whether it's anchorages or coral pilotage, and all of that is relevant. So after a couple of weeks, we felt more comfortable, I guess, nudging through ice, nudging through brash ice. There was one moment or one evening where we pulled into this bay and there was just a narrow sea, shallow sea ice on the surface. We couldn't get the anchor down through the ice, so we just basically drove into it, made a wedge, and that was us for the night. And you hope, of course, that the wind doesn't move the whole sheet of ice out of the bay. I've read a lot of Crean and Shackleton and those books, but the musings in those books are the statements, the consistent thing, which I understand now, is what we see down there, the mind cannot comprehend. The scale of it, the detail of it, the change of the the change of light. It's just it's another world. Yeah. So not sure if that answers your question.
Well, it makes me want to go there, but what it does make me wonder is, I know you've got a family, that I'm sure that you're very much devoted to them, but in another life, would you be that person that was there with the sort of 6 months worth of beard growth in a boat sailing the seas? I mean, it just sounds to me, hearing the way you talk, that you're so happy exploring the oceans like that.
Totally. I think for most of us, we're happier on the water. Happiest. Let's say happiest. We're happiest on the water. And in fact, I was looking through some photos last night. I was just trying to sort out all of my files and stuff, and I came across one shot of my son, and he's kind of tucked into the mainsail cover of a boat that we chartered down in the Bahamas a couple of years ago, and he had this smile on his face that, you know, is just sort of lit up the whole sky, you know, and even his little sister, who normally annoys him, just like, wow, Oisin's, it's been a long time since I've seen Oisin smile like that. And it was just one of those smiles. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is, I think, yeah, you know, we're all happy on the water, in connection with nature. We think about, you know, the present. We don't think about too much about the past, and we're not thinking about the future. You're in the moment. And I think that's a state that, you know, all athletes and will understand as well. Something like the Volvo Ocean Race, of course, is quite a long moment. It's 9 months from start to finish, and that's just a race. So best way to live it, really.
Well, then let's talk about the reward that you do get for that sort of level of commitment. You know, the race demands. The win that you had in 2011-12 with Groupama, sailing with Frank Camas, how did that team compare with, you know, your other experiences before?
We were very lucky with that campaign, because the structure that Frank and Stefan Guilbault had built up with Groupama and their relationship allowed them to engage with the ocean race as an entry far out. I think we started straight off the back of the previous campaign. I think I'd been sailing with Green Dragon. I'd obviously spent a lot of time in France racing. I'd sailed against Frank. In fact, when I first arrived in the Figaro, he was I think he'd won that year. I'd moved on from the Figaro to sailing in the trimaran class, and would have been sailing against Frank over that 4 or 5 year period. So we knew of and had sailed against each other. We had the advantage of 3 years leading into that edition. It was an edition in an virtually open class, box rule, right? The Volvo 70. And the emphasis was very clearly on design and innovation, which was Groupama's skill set. They built up a whole resource around that, their own design team. They employed Juan Kay to design the base design for the boat, and then brought their own value-added touch from the Groupama sailing team. We had access to France's best offshore sailors, Charles Caudrelier, who of course went on to skipper both of Dongfeng's entries, and bringing a lot of the original Groupama, or some of the original Groupama crew with him as well. So yeah, right place, right time, kind of, you know, I guess situation of circumstances which all led up to Groupama having the right skill set, the right resources, and the luck. You still need luck to make sure that even when you lose a rig, like we did halfway through the race, that you can still recover. And that was a moment, I think that was the crux of that whole race for us. We could have gone on to a kind of a desperate spiraling descendant of bad luck and underperformance, but the opposite happened. The team rallied around Frank and the team, and we went on to continue to win races and win legs and win inshore races, and consolidate the overall win, which was a huge comeback ultimately.
And on a personal note, finishing in Galway, a nice way to go about it. I mean, that's everything coming together right there.
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, I still really can't conceptualize that whole couple of months. We'd obviously had an amazing campaign with the Green Dragon, with a stopover in Galway. It was a great stopover. It's very close to where I grew up. At that stage, sailing, certainly on the world stage, but even in Ireland, had become, recognised as a sport. And then with Groupama, the last stopover was in Galway and right past my home where I grew up, and I suppose just validated and justified all the hard work that myself, my family, and all my people I've raced with, raced against, sort of just validated all that effort. And so it's great to be able to take that, I suppose, and build on it, and to consider now, I've been able to go on and do other races and look for repeats of the podium in other ways. But there's a broader context, I think, to sport, which a win possibly allows you to think about a bit more. The initial kind of need for justifying 20 years in the ocean race had been fulfilled by a Volvo win. And I was able to kind of step back and go, okay, I want to be involved with a team that I'm happy, working within, has the right philosophy around why we're doing it, is working with partners that are there for meaning and with purpose. And of course, throughout our event now, like, the ocean race, and in the last team, Bestest 11th Hour Racing, and now with 11th Hour Racing, we're in a space which looks at the sport and looks at the ocean race in much, much broader terms than I initially started competing with, but echo in many ways the way I grew up. So it's very satisfying, and kind of along with that comes a lot of, I kind of feel, responsibility and opportunities. So
does that role, like you say, that you've got now at the moment with 11th Hour Racing looking for the next edition, to the role that you're doing there as a sustainability manager, hearing you speak, I'm guessing it's a natural fit for you.
Yeah, and I'm very lucky. I think, again, Mark and Charlie, this is their third campaign. It's fairly unusual in our sport, I think, to have consistency from one campaign to another. Quite often they're bespoke campaigns which are put together. If we're lucky, we can roll into two campaigns. Mark and Charlie are going into their third ocean race, 8 years. And from a sustainability, but even you can take it from a communications or performance standpoint, it's about moving the benchmark each time to something that's even more ambitious. And that's never more important in the sustainability space. So for a typical sporting organization, football team, or other sporting team that's applying sustainability, they can apply sustainability strategy over the long term and see changes from one year to the other. In sailing, as a team, it's harder to do that. As a team, certainly organizations, yacht clubs can certainly do that, but as a team, it's hard to do that, because it's, okay, how do we apply sustainability here for this 12-month campaign? There's a limit to what you can do. So this is a strong one, I think, for Mark and Charlie's campaign, and rolling from Alpha Medica through Bestest 11th Hour Racing now into this campaign. This campaign, very similar to Groupama, is a 3 to 4 year campaign. We've got a great training boat in under the original name of Alex's Hugo Boss, and it's now been rebranded 11-1 for us, and the 11th Hour Racing training boat. The guys did a great job in the last Transatlantic Jacques Vabre double-handed race, and Charlie and Pascal got a third, so really well done. And we're rolling into the design and build of a new boat. So the scope of the campaign is large. We need to step up from applying sustainability to a 12-month racing campaign to a 3 or 4 year campaign that involves all of these various elements: boat build, design, innovation, operations, obviously on and off the water. And to help me, we've been able to bring on Amy Monroe, who's worked in that space a lot, and we've also brought on an intern as well in our sustainability department. So kind of the scale of the whole campaign has, I guess, grown with the importance of sustainability within the team. Now with 11th Hour Racing as our primary sponsor and partner, sustainability is the deliverable outside of performance, and we don't see them as being separate or different or incompatible. On the contrary, we see sustainability as a way of showcasing performance. And there's certainly, decisions to be made, but our role is to showcase real solutions to the real challenges faced by the sport and by our industry. And so by being the most performant boat on the water with the current design parameters, but looking for the solutions that are available to us within those parameters, within the race rules, within the class rules, we're already showcasing a vision of what can happen in the future. And the next layer, of course, is then to provide recommendations that by changing those rules and policies, how can we have an even bigger impact? And so we're working very closely with the organizations, of course, like the Ocean Race, but IMOCA and the other boats within the IMOCA fleet to reconsider what the race rules, what the class rules should look like.
Does it help going into those conversations for someone like yourself? I'm sure some people are very receptive to ideas. I'm sure some people are not. But you're not speaking from a position of purely somebody who's looked at a spreadsheet or I read a book on it. You've been out there, you're a sailor, so look, you can do it this way and a team does operate in this way. I'm guessing your experience is something that gives you a little bit of ammunition here.
Yeah, I'm not sure we need an awful lot of ammunition. There's a lot of people who are looking at this space, a lot of people who haven't looked at it but are aware that they're going to be asked questions soon and understand that they need to, find solutions which are relevant to the products that they're creating or the services they're providing. So honestly, we really feel like as a team, we're the right team, we're the right people in the right place, doing the right work. And the choice, of course, when you decide to enter the Ocean Race with the IMOCA class, the move to basing our team initially in Brittany was a very obvious one from a performance standpoint, from access to the skill and expertise that has been developed in Brittany and the IMOCA class in that space. It was very obvious. Our partnership with Mer Concept, Francois Scabard's teams, is fundamental to that whole thing. But funnily enough, it's also been a very sustainable choice because the marine industry in Brittany, by its very nature, has very short supply chains. One, just down the road, our mast is being built in Lorient. It's very likely that most or many of our components for the boat will come from within Brittany or at least the Western France area. And so that's a hugely sustainable choice. It's sustainable not just from the environmental context, but also from a social and economic context in terms of supporting a sustainable industry. And everyone really within the industry is wants to apply sustainability, just don't necessarily have all the solutions. And I think no one person has all the solutions. It's about collaborating to find the right way forward. An important, I guess, one context to share is that sailing inherently involves technology and innovation, and therefore our grey matter. As sailors, the best sailors typically can take a concept or a feeling that they have as an athlete on the water and transfer it to a designer or a design board. And so up until now, everyone's been focused on performance and using all of this grey matter, and some of it's quite significant, some bloody smart sailors and designers out there. And all of their focus has been on performance, beating the rule, improving the rule, having the most performant boat in the water. What we need to do now is to divert even just a small percentage of that grey matter to finding sustainable solutions. And so, when someone says to me, I don't know if we can really manage to have no single-use plastic bottles on this event, I'm like, what are you talking about? We're foiling boats around the world. We can sail around the world now in less than 2 months. And so those type of arguments really are out the window now, and you don't hear them anymore. Basic best practices are being applied throughout our sport, whether it's kids, big teams, yacht clubs, or even in the charter and leisure industry. The bigger challenges now are really around using the innovation and the capacity within the industry to come up with the best sustainable practices and innovative solutions for the industry as a whole, and alternative materials, and also fundamentally looking at why are we out there in the first place. Yeah.
I'm wondering whether this, the sustainability manager role is something that obviously, like I say, it is the perfect fit. You talk about it with real passion, but surely it doesn't preclude you or preclude the fans from seeing you on the water again. Because I'm thinking of the last edition and that first leg with Vestas 11th Hour Racing. What was it? Okay, maybe a reserve sailor, but sustainability manager, 24 hours to go from the start. Suddenly you're putting on your sailing boots.
Yeah, it was a lot of satisfaction. I think that the whole team pulled out a win in the first leg and set us up in good stead for what was to come, which was a hell of a ride for everyone involved, and largely the reason why we're here today with the team reborn, if you like. You can take a sailor off the water, but not for very long, right? So I think what's fun for me is that now I can kind of step back a little bit and pick my battles. As a young athlete, you are willing to put everything on the line to achieve your goals, and that's really the epitome, I guess, of commitment. But it's a vision that I think in some ways has been oversold. The notion that winning at all costs is something that we should aspire to as young or old athletes, in sport, in business, in anything. And I think that's wrong. Winning at all costs does have a cost. It has many costs. It has social costs, family costs, economic and environmental costs. And we really need to reframe what we're doing within sport as individual athletes, as an athlete that does or does not make it to the top podium. I think we can all recognize times when we've performed and delivered the gold or whatever it is, top result, but been less than satisfied with our own performance for whatever reason, or many cases where maybe we've underperformed in terms of pure, lineup at the end of at the finish, but actually we've been very satisfied with our performance. And I think we need to kind of broaden that perspective and start to consider actually, what am I achieving? It's more about the journey, and it's more about, it's not going to be satisfying to win a gold medal if it has significant environmental and economic and family impacts, social impacts at the end of the day. And so I think, the notion of why we're out there and what performance and what winning means needs to have a much broader discussion now, both from the event side and from the team side. And there are many ways to win, but we really need to consider what's the collateral damage associated with what we're doing, and redefining what winning means. I think that's crucial.